Hi students! For our second half of the eco-criticism, we're going to start by talking about the eco-critics' political goal. Their goal is to change the social conversation about nature to respond to humans' role in the environmental crisis. And so I included these pictures from Lion King here because I think it illustrates really neatly an eco-critical message. Whereas the land is sort of beautiful and thriving when Mufasa's in charge, the land becomes, dead and covered in drought when Scar is in charge. So the film is showing the impact of leadership on the physical location that the lions are in, like the area of Pride Rock. So this would be really eco-critical, right? They're talking about how there's a link between political leadership and environmental conditions. Eco-critics take a specifically Earth-centered approach. So they argue that humans kind of aren't special and different, but that human history is only a part of Earth's history and a small part at that. They also argue that humans are accountable to the environment. So that's kind of the opposite of dominion, right? We're not, to eco-critics, we're not in charge of the environment. We are responsible for taking care of it and accountable to it. They remind us that the environment is in flux. Evolution hasn't stopped, right? Human evolution continues, even though it's very slow. Animal and plant evolution continues. The Earth isn't done. It's a process that continues. And they also point out that the planet will carry on after humans. So this picture I included is an abandoned theme park in the Ukraine near Chernobyl. And after the nuclear disaster in Chernobyl, there haven't been people living there, but as you can see, the environment carries on, altered, of course, but it carries on. And eco-critics would make a similar argument about climate change, for example, that if climate change renders humans extinct at one point, the planet will still be here. Plants and animals of some kind will still be here. It just won't be perhaps the ones that we recognize now. So that's kind of the Earth-centered approach, that the eco-critics are taking the larger view and looking at the planet first rather than humanity specifically. Closely tied up with eco-criticism are animal studies, where their goal is to grant animals more rights and to kind of take away the moral and legal distinctions between human and animals. In fact, they would call other animals non-human animals, right? Humans and human animals and non-human animals. They argue that we are, in fact, more like animals than we acknowledge. And that kind of over time, humans have made an effort to make animals seem inferior to make us seem superior. But as science learns more and more about other species, we gain insights into the kinds of intelligence that animals have, which isn't the same as humans, but shows that the differences between us aren't as strong as we thought. For example, that elephants have the capacity to grieve, right? We might not think of elephants as being emotional creatures when in fact they are, right? They have the emotional capacity to some degree that humans do. And in fact, some species are gaining more rights. So chimpanzees do not have full rights of personhood, but they do have the right, if they are detained in a zoo or in a lab, they can fight their detention in court. Now, of course, a chimpanzee won't know to call a lawyer and do that, but animal rights activists can do it on the behalf of the chimp. So they don't have the full human rights status, but they are gaining more and more legal rights on the understanding that chimps are fairly close to humans, at least genetically speaking, fairly close. These are just kind of an overview of other ideas that eco-critics hold in general. They're not held by every eco-critic. It's just kind of a variety of different ideas that are floated in that community. So the first is the inherent value in all life, kind of like big or small, right down to ants and elephants, right? That all of those things have some kind of inherent value that can't be taken away, right? That they're sort of born or created with value. They would also argue that environmental destruction is a result of capitalism, right? That the capitalism's need for raw materials and the belief in dominion has led humans to believe that they can just kind of take from the earth and turn that into products. But when done kind of too far, it causes environmental destruction. They would also argue that the social cost of environmental problems is often borne by marginalized people. So the wealthy folks who are, in some cases, causing environmental problems have the luxury of living very safely and comfortably, whereas those who don't have money, for example, or resources can't get away from environmental problems. That's part of what happened in Flint, Michigan, right? When as the water continues to be very toxic in Flint, the folks there don't all have the environmental resources to leave. Right? If they had a billionaire who lived in their community, the billionaire could have left. And so a lack of resources often leads marginalized folks to suffer the results of environmental problems because they don't have the ease of being able to get away. Ecocritics also trust science, and they look to Earth-centered scientific solutions. So how can we use science to help the planet specifically? There is a debate kind of around technology because technology can be a plus and a minus, environmentally speaking, right? So sometimes to create technology, we have to mine, and so we're taking more natural resources away. But there are some technologies that might have a lesser environmental impact and could be worth investigating. So ecocritics sort of debate just how much we can rely on technology to help us solve environmental problems. Okay, and then the last thing we'll take a look at are the ecocritical skills, or skills that you can take from ecocriticism to use in your life as a student. And one thing that ecocritics do is they reframe. Right? They're trying to ask people to reframe their worldview to include the environment all the time. And I understand that that can be exhausting, right? To have to always kind of consider environmental impacts is a very difficult thing to do. It's difficult for me to do, and I fail most of the time. But that's one of the things they've asked of us, right? Is to kind of reframe our picture. And whether we do that or not in terms of the environment, as college students, learning how to reframe our worldview and see the world from multiple angles becomes a really important skill. Ecocritics would also ask us to use scientific data to support conclusions, right? What does the science tell us about the best way to handle particular situations? It also asks us to think really critically about the depictions of nature around us. What kind of ideology is the text supporting in terms of how nature is treated, or the relationship between humans and nature is treated? Ecocritics also asks us to consider boundaries and overlaps, which is, again, a very important college level skill, to think about places where two groups are kind of separated. What's the difference between the two? And where two groups are kind of overlapped, what are the similarities? So they remind us that humans are part of nature. We are also animals. But they would also ask us to consider some boundaries. For example, if an animal character is anthropomorphized, why is that boundary between human and animal being blurred, and kind of is that appropriate? And then last, they would ask us to consider our own responsibility to the environment in our work. So, for example, as you're working your way through college, are there ways to improve the environmental situation in the kinds of assignments you do, the kinds of classes that you pick, maybe the kinds of involvement you have on campus? Ecocritics would ask us to think about that as we are kind of moving our way through the world, or in our case, more specifically, moving our way through the college experience. I hope this information is helpful. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I am happy to help out. Thanks.